Hello there and welcome to Joe Awesome One channel. Thank you all for being with me today. I'm going to start a book called The Palace of Lost Memories After the Rift, Book 1 by C.J. Archer, and this will be chapter 1. All the details will be in the description box below for the publishers and any details that I can find. Pictures are on screen now with the map to the realm, and I'm going to leave the map on for a little bit longer so you can get to know it. As I start the story, we will continue with the visual show. Whispers of sorcery began when the palace's foundations appeared overnight one frost-bitten day. The broad plain 5 miles from Mull contained nothing but grass and muddy puddles. The next, solid walls took shape as if they sprouted from the ground like daffodils, and the first hint of spring. Looking at the completed building now, surrounded by mature, formal gardens, I could see why those whispers had grown louder. Despite the distance between the palace and the clearing on Lookout Hill where I stood, I could tell it was enormous. It must be 4 times as long as the street on which I lived, and it was certainly higher than the temple in the centre of Mull. According to my father, it was even bigger than the main temple in Tilting, Glancia's capital city, where the last king had ruled from a crumbling old castle. That structure had taken 3 years to build. The palace had taken less than 3 months. 3 months in which not a single builder had been seen coming or going. No locals had been tasked with the labour, and according to the travellers and traders who now filled Mull's taverns to bursting, they said they hadn't come from elsewhere in Glancia, or any of the neighbouring kingdoms either. It was as if they had been conjured from thin air and returned there after the palace's completion. Magic. Even I, a practical woman who believed in what she could see, hear and touch, couldn't explain the sudden appearance of the palace. It wasn't simply the speed of its erection, but also the secrecy that shrouded it. Only a handful of delivery carts from the village and nearby farms had been to the palace to supply its kitchens, and guards hadn't allowed them beyond the gates. Palace servants unloaded the goods and retreated inside. They did not engage in conversation, they did not make eye contact, and they certainly did not come to the village on their days off. Except for that one time, a maid wandered into Mull early one morning, asking passers-by if they knew her. When no one could offer her answers, she fell to her knees and sobbed until 4 palace guards collected her. She went with them meekly enough, but her haunted eyes stayed with me. Not just hers, but theirs too. With a last look at the dazzling building, glinting in the late spring sunshine like a jewel, I picked up my battered old pack, as well as my new one given to me by my patient I'd called on, and turned to go. The thundering of hooves along the forest path warned me to remain in the clearing. By the sound of it, more than one rider was heading my way, and they were travelling fast. To move onto the path would be folly, so I waited until the reckless youths passed. No doubt it was Lord Deerhorn's sons, come to see the palace for themselves. Lookout Hill offered the best view after all. Either that, or they had decided to hunt here. They were supposed to keep to their own estate, but they were arrogant enough to shoot their arrows on common land whenever they pleased. I'd learned a long time ago to stay away from deer-horned lordlings, but I didn't want them to think I was an animal worth hunting. I made myself visible. Facing the area of dense forest where the path briefly emerged before disappearing again on the other side, they couldn't mistake me for a fox or rabbit. Then again, they were as thick as the tree foliage in this part of the forest, and fond of losing their arrows. The dull thud of hooves came closer. Then the first rider burst into the clearing. His head jerked towards me, and I caught a glimpse of a short dark beard, but little else, as the hooded cloak he wore disappeared. He disappeared into the forest again, his horse's stride not even slowing. A few moments later the forest spat out another rider, this one wearing black leather with gold trim at the shoulder of his doublet, and long black boots. He sat tall in the saddle, looking comfortable despite his horse's ferocious speed. I got a good glance at his face, and as he slowed to study me in return. Short dark hair, framed hard planes, and a cleanly shaven jaw. It was his eyes that commanded attention, however. They were the blue of the shallows of Half Moon Cove on a sunny day. Those eyes made a quick assessment of me before focusing forward again. "Question her," he barked, before urging his horse into the forest ahead. He had hardly disappeared when another rider emerged. He wore a crimson doublet with gold braiding. Crimson and gold, palace uniforms. I clutched my bag to my chest. The rider stopped and swore. He looked at me, swore again, and stared into the forest after the other riders. He swore a third time, and his horse circled. Clearly, good manners weren't a requirement for palace servants. Good looks, however, must be. This rider was dark like the one who had preceded him, but with brown eyes and a bow mouth that turned down severely. He was scowled at me. "You there," he hailed. Branches and brush rustled, and a fourth rider emerged into the clearing. This one also wore a palace uniform. He was younger than his companion. My theory about the handsome servants was dashed by the newcomer. Though he was also dark, he had a nose like a horse, and a spotty forehead and chin. His narrow chest rose and fell as his heavy breathing. He couldn't be more than 18. "Who are you?" he asked, as bold as he could. I bristled, but forced my spine to relax. I would usually treat such rudeness with silent disdain, but these were the king's men, and I must be obeyed. Besides, if I was nice, I might find out something about the palace and King Leon. "Jocelyn Cully," I said, still holding my pack in front of me. The new empty one remained slung over my shoulder. "Everyone calls me Josie. Are you from the palace?" I indicated the view behind me. The lad sat higher in the saddle. "Huh? It looks tiny from up here, Max. Come take a look." The man addressed as Max did not move. "Did you see him?" he demanded of me. "Who?" I said. "The rider in the hood." "A little." The other man followed him. I pointed to the gap in the trees where the path led. "The captain," the young man told me. "Captain Hammer. I managed to contain my snort of derision before it escaped." "What did he look like?" Max asked. "The man in the hood." I shrugged. "I didn't see much. He had a short dark brown beard." "What shade of brown?" asked the younger man, leaning forward on the pommel, chestnut mud dung. Was he making fun of me? He didn't laugh. Not even a hint or a smile touched his lips. "Medium brown," I said. "Anything else?" Max pressed. glancing towards the path again. Unlike the younger man, he seemed restless and eager to follow the two riders. The younger man still looked like he hadn't quite caught his breath. "No," I said. "It was very fork." Max grunted and lost his balance, half falling, half staggering off his horse. An arrow protruded from his arm. "Do be merciful! Get down!" Max shouted as he fell to his knees. "Find cover!" I dashed behind a row of shrubs on the opposite side of the clearing from where the arrow had been shot. I swallowed hard and dared to peek through the gap in the bushes. The two men were still alone in their horses in the clearing. Max lay on the ground, blood seeped through his clothes, darkening the crimson fabric. He must have pulled the arrow out. Fool! The younger man knelt beside him, his body over Max's, protecting him and making him target of himself in the process. "Get off me, you little idiot!" Max snapped, easily shoving off the skinnier lad. "Do you want to get shot in the behind?" The youth glanced behind him in the direction of the forest, then angled himself behind the horse for protection. "Max," he hissed, "take over." He'd have shot again by now if he was still here. Max sat up and inspected his arm. He was probably right, and it was safe to emerge from my hiding spot. "Let me see," I said, crouching beside him. I reached for him, but he leaned away. I have some medical skill." "You can't," the lad blurted out, "because I'm a woman." It wasn't a question, but he answered it as if I were. "Can see you're a woman." "No, that is, I can see you're a woman." His gaze dipped into my breast. "And pretty women aren't smart, and doctors have to be smart." "Shut up, Quentin," Max growled. He got to his feet, only to sway a little. He toppled onto me. I would not be able to hold him up. "Please let me look after the wound. I assure you I know what I am doing. I've been studying at my father's knee ever since I could read. He taught me everything he knows, and he's a brilliant doctor. Best in Glancia, perhaps the entire Fist Peninsula. Even so, I've taken my learning upon myself this last year, and so my patients have seen the benefits too. Of course, all my patients were childbearing women, although I was perfectly capable of treating ailments and inquiries too, and injuries too. Unfortunately, the lawmakers disagreed. I'm perfectly capable," I finished. Max put up his hands and beamed as if he had been paid a compliment. I kept my mouth shut. I did tend to chatter too much when I was nervous. The pounding of horses' hooves had us all turning toward the path again, but it was only on the second rider returning, the one who had given these men orders to question me, the Captain Hammer. I lost him. A bit of a whiff and a shake of the head. He glanced at me and looked as if he were about to speak when Quentin got in first. "If you'd been riding lightning, you'd have caught him." On the leaf litter at the edge of the clearing. "How bad is it?" "I can't tell," I said, before Max answered. "He won't let me inspect it." "I'm Jocelyn Cully, from Mull. It's my professional opinion that the wound needs to be bound before he loses too much blood. It may also require suturing. I help up my bag. I have the necessary equipment right here. I was always prepared with surgical thread, a fine needle, and small doses of mother's milk for painful births. It's a distance to the village, and I'm your best option." It was perhaps a little reckless, considering that they were the king's men, but I was prepared to take the risk. The man needed immediate medical attention, and surely I'd only incur a fine and a slap on the wrist, perhaps not even that. The captain, chose to overlook the fact I wasn't qualified. I was, after all, doing this man a service. I went to open my bag, but the captain jumped down from his horse and snatched it from me. He was much taller than me, with a powerful frame. His shoulders were as broad as Max's, but due to his height he didn't look blocky. He checked inside the bag. "It contains medical equipment," I said hotly, "not weapons." The captain handed the bag back after a thorough inspection. "Let us see the wound, Sergeant." "I'm fine," Max growled. "I don't need a healer." I focused on the forest behind him and gasped. All the men spun to look, but only Max swayed and fell to one knee. He swore, then sighed and sat. Quentin snickered. "I like her." Max glared at him, but even though I could see there was no animosity in it, he tried to remove his double, but Quentin had to help him. By the time he had removed his shirt, Max was sweating and breathing heavily. Quentin and I both helped while the captain kept watch on the surrounding forest. He seemed oblivious to his sergeant's pain. I tied Max's shirt around his upper arm to stem the blood flow. His veins soon bulged nicely. "His fingers are going purple," Quentin said. "Is that good?" For now, I rummaged through my bag, tossing aside forceps, vials and suction pump until I found a bottle of mother's milk. "Swallow a mouthful of that," I said to Max. "You're trying to get him drunk?" Quentin asked. "It's a soothing medicine. It numbs pain. It will help calm while I stitch him up." "Like ale, ha ha ha." "A little pain." Max shook his head. "I don't need it." "It'll hurt," I warned. "I can cope with a little pain." "I'll leave the bottle here. Grab it if you change your mind." I set the bottle down beside him and pushed aside the equipment in my bag again until I found the jar. It would be wonderful to move all of my things into the new bag the leather seller's wife had given me as payment after the safe delivery of her baby. It had internal compartments, pockets and straps to organize all my tools and medicines. I removed the lid on the small jar and extracted the needle and thread stored within. "Ready?" I asked, threading the needle. "Ready," Quentin said, crouching beside me, watching closely. "Get on with it," Max snapped. I stuck the needle into his flesh. "Blimey," he blurted out. "Mind your tongue," in front of Miss Cully, the captain said without turning around. He stood rigid, his shoulders tense. "Doctor, not mistress," Quentin told him. "Dr. Cully, how deep does that needle have to go in?" Max paled. "Quentin," he gasped. "Bring that ugly face of yours closer." Quentin leaned in. "Why?" "So I can shut your mouth for you." The captain whipped around and interrupted Max's fist before it made contact with Quentin's face. "Maybe you should take to mother's milk," he said. "You're going soft, Hammer." One side of Max's mouth hooked into a wry smile. I pushed the needle in again. Max grunted and squeezed his eyes shut. The captain snatched up the bottle of mother's milk. "Drink, Max." Max accepted the bottle. "2 mouthfuls, I reminded him. "You're a solid man, but 3 will have you throwing up." I waited for the medicine to take effect before continuing with the stewing. The captain returned to watching the forest, his arms crossed over his chest, but his stance was a little more relaxed. I thought he was tense from alertness, but now I suspected he was partly due to concern for his sergeant. "So your friends call you Josie, eh?" Quentin asked me. "Can I call you Josie?" "If you like." "You can call me Quentin. He's Sergeant Max, and that's Captain Hammer." "Are those first names or last?" I asked. The captain turned and glared at Quentin over his shoulder. The sergeant glared too. Quentin swallowed. "Is he ready now?" he asked. "He looks ready. You ready, Max?" The sergeant sighed and closed his eyes. He finally relaxed. The mother's milk isn't working. I can still hear him. I laughed softly. It only numbs the pain. Listening to him is painful. I went to work, finishing that. The sergeant sighed and closed his eyes. He finally relaxed. The mother's milk isn't working. I can still hear him. I laughed softly. It only numbs the pain. Listening to him is painful. I went to work, finishing what I'd begun. The task wasn't difficult, particularly with Max now calm and pain-free. I'd stitched far more delicate areas in than a big man's arm. It gave me time to think that the strangeness of the situation that I'd found myself in, aside from the mad servant and the guards who had collected her from the village, these were the first people from the palace I'd ever seen. No one in Mull had been presented with such good opportunity to learn more. No one in Mull had been present with such a good opportunity to learn more. "Are you palace guards?" I asked as I stitched. To my surprise, Quentin didn't respond. He looked to Hammer. "Yes," the captain said without turning around. "Who was that man you was chasing? Does he work at the palace too?" "That's not something I can divulge." "Have you worked at the palace long?" The captain shifted his stance the entire time. "So you saw it being built? Where did the builders come from? Here and there? Can you be more specific?" "No." This wasn't going well. "Where are you originally from?" He didn't answer. "Why can't you tell me?" I pressed. "It's a simple question." "You'd think so," Quentin muttered. "You and Sergeant Max are short with dark hair," I said to Quentin. "So you must be originally from Friedland." Quentin turned huge eyes to me. "You've been there?" he whispered. "You've been to Friedland?" "No, my father has. He has told me stories of all the kingdoms and the Republic. He travelled all over the first before marrying my mother and settling here in Mull. But everyone knows that sand people of Friedland are short with dark hair. You don't need to go there to know." "Right," Quentin said, "of course." "Captain Hammer is different," I said, glancing at his broad shoulders. "Like those of us native to Glacia, but he's dark, like you. Glacia folk are naturally fair, and pretty." Quentin blushed. "Real pretty." I smiled. "I suspect the captain doesn't like to be called pretty." Hammer shifted his stance again. "The captain doesn't like people talking about him behind his back." He glanced over his shoulder, and those eyes so blue against his tanned skin drilled into me. "Are you done, Doctor?" It was a little embarrassing to be called the title I hadn't earned officially through the college, and never would. Women weren't allowed to study doctoring. Midwifery and how to make medicines, yes, but not surgery or other medical disciplines. The college system was archaic, not only for entry into the College of Surgery, but into all the colleges. The rules ought to be changed. But I couldn't foresee women being allowed in any time soon. None of that was a secret. It was common knowledge. Why did these men not know it? I finished stitching and tied the end of the thread. I asked Quentin to cut off the excess, and he looked more than pleased to contribute after removing the shirt from around Max's arm. I told the sergeant he could sit up. Captain Hammer tapped Max's cheek. "Wake up." Max cracked open an eye. "The doctor's not finished." He closed his eyes again. "She is." The captain pulled Max into a sitting position. "Come on, we must go." He scanned the forest again. Did he think the archer was still there, watching? I handed the dew blade to Max. He slung it around his injured side, but needed help with the other. The captain and I managed to arrange it equally on both shoulders before assisting him to stand. Max groaned, but slumped against Hammer. The captain looped his arm around Max and guided him to the horse. Quentin gathered the horse's reins. "You can do it, mate. Max, upsy-daisy." The sergeant pushed off from Hammer. "I'm no child," he growled. He tried to mount alone, but couldn't. The captain wordlessly stepped in and helped. He managed to get Max on the horse easily, even through the broad-set man. Must be heavy from what I had witnessed. Max was a barrel of solid muscle. "Where's your horse?" Quentin asked. "Where's your horse?" Quentin asked me as he mounted. "I don't have a horse," I said, "and I walked." "It's a long way back to Mull," the captain said. He remained standing, his hand resting lightly on his horse's neck. "What were you doing up here?" "Passing through," I said nervously. "It's a hill. No one climbs a hill if they're just passing through." "She was looking at the view," Quentin said. "There's a nice one of it from the palace from over there." He pointed to the edge of the clearing, where the hill dropped away too steeply for trees to grow. The captain walked to the edge and studied the palace in the distance. He stayed there for some time, his back to us. Only the ends of his hair fluttered in the light breeze, but otherwise he didn't move. The silence stretched. Quentin cleared his throat. "Captain, Max is falling asleep again." The captain turned away from the view, and my breath caught the throat. The captain turned away from the view, and my breath caught in my throat. He had the same haunting look in his eyes that the maid servant had had, and the guards who collected her that day. "Are you all right?" I asked in a rush of breath. He halted and blinked rapidly at me. "We'll take you back to the village." "It's all right," I said. "I can walk." I had a patient to visit at the base of the hill and decided to come up and have a look at the palace. It's such a pleasant day. The sun is shining. The palace is so pretty in the sunshine, with all those glass windows sparkling like gems. Is it made of gold? It looks like gold from up here, but perhaps it's something else. I imagine gold is too expensive to use as building material. I bit my tongue to stop myself rambling. "We'll take you home," the captain said again. "You can't stay here alone." "Why not?" He hesitated before saying, "You saw the man we were chasing?" "Only a little, just his beard, really." "He might think you saw more. That's why he doubled back." My heart skipped a beat. "You think he was shooting at me?" "It's possible." "Then why not try again after missing?" "Perhaps he couldn't get a clear second shot before I returned." "She hid in the bushes," Quentin told his captain. I swallowed hard. Someone had tried to kill me? The captain touched my elbow. "Doctor, are you all right?" Yes, I'm fine." "It's doubtful he'll come back for you. If you didn't recognize him, then he doesn't know you either, or where to find you. If he's clever, he'll be far away from now. Even so, I'd prefer if you allowed us to escort you home." Quentin shifted back on the saddle and patted his front. "Climb on." "She'll ride with me," Hammer said. Quentin sighed. "Don't you have enough?" "You're a terrible rider. If Dr. Cully wants to get home safely, she rides with me." "I fell off once today," Max piped up from where he had sat slumped in his saddle. "A ride back to the village is the least we can do," the captain said. "I'll send payment for your service. I have no coin on me." We left in a hurry. I gathered up both my packs and helped myself onto the saddle, sitting aside rather than astride, as I'd seen Lady Deerhorn do. The captain mounted behind me in one fluid movement. I felt small and delicate next to him. He smelled of horse and leather. His hard thigh bumped against mine. Like Max, as I suspected, he was all muscle too. We headed slowly through the forest, back down the hill. Little light reached through the canopy, making it feel like twilight, despite being just after noon. The air felt damper too, denser, as if rain wasn't far away. If I hadn't been out in the bright sunshine moments before, I would have thought the weather was entirely different. The captain remained alert and silent as we rode. His reassurance that her hooded archer wasn't a local and would be far away by now offered little comfort. I held my packs close to my chest and watched the forest too. I'd wager the archer was a burglar or a poacher who thought he would try his luck on the palace grounds. Or perhaps he was an escaped servant who needed to be retrieved. There you go. Thank you for joining me on this new, I don't know, project, I suppose. Let me know in the comments below what you thought, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. I love you all.